Well, hello everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming today. My name is Alan Henceroth, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Arapahoe Basin, and I'd really like to welcome you to the future of skiing, the science behind the snow. And we're very fortunate to have 4 great speakers here today to make up our panel. And this event was organized. There's a couple of people I want to point out to you. In the back of the room is Shaw Miklas, and Shaw is our guest services and, I'm sorry, I said that wrong, our Senior Guest Services and Sustainability Manager. And I'd like to introduce Mike Nathan, who's our Sustainability Manager here in the front. And I'd like to introduce Elizabeth also. Elizabeth, I forgot your last name. Maru, okay, very much, okay. Maru, who helped us organize this today. So I'd really like to welcome you guys. You know, at A-Basin, we try to work very hard to be a leader in our community, to be a leader in sustainability. And that's why we're doing this today. You know, we're trying to make a difference out there on the hill, actually using less energy and making a positive impact on the world. We're also trying to use our position to help spread the message about taking care of our environment, spread the message about climate change, and what we can do to make things better in the future. You know, here at A-Basin, you know, we're pretty high up in the mountains. We get a lot of snow. It's cold a lot of the time. But I got to tell you, we're seeing some things happen here. And it's really hard to measure the difference between, or to understand the difference between climate and weather. Weather is what we're looking outside at right now. And you know, climate is an amalgamation of years and years of weather and data and all kinds of other things. But you know, for those of us that have been around the basin for a while, and I've been here for 30 years, just about to the person, everyone says, you know, spring's coming earlier the last 10, 15 years than it used to come back in the 80s and 90s. I think there's hardly anyone that wants to argue with that. And I know these guys are scientists, and they're going to tell you a lot of good stuff, and hopefully they'll substantiate the things I just said there. But it's real. We're seeing it. And actually, we had a forecasted weather event yesterday that really startled us and scared us. The forecast all day yesterday was that today it was going to be raining all the way up to 12,500 feet, which is absolutely unheard of at Arapahoe Basin in April. Rain in April is unheard of, and I guess there was quite a rain event yesterday in Utah, out in the Wasatch and the Uinta Mountains, and it really startled us to the point that I didn't sleep well last night worrying about it raining all day up here. Fortunately, the forecast was wrong, off by just a little bit. But we're concerned about what we're seeing. We think these things are real. So, you know, again, we have 4 great speakers today. I am going to start with Dr. Jennifer Kay from the University of Colorado, and she's going to get us rolling.
Great, thanks so much. So yeah, I'm going to do a big picture introduction to climate change. And I'll start with just a couple pictures here, just to get a flavor of who I am and what I'm passionate about. So on the right is actually taken here at A-Basin last year, après-ski, enjoying with friends. I love to ski, and I'm really concerned about the future of skiing. And so it's really awesome to come to a place and ski at a place where that's understood and where there's real substantial efforts being made to make awareness of that known. So thank you, Al, and thank you, A-Basin. That's really not true everywhere, and it really should be. On the left is actually a picture of some of my students. They look a little funny, I bet, to you, right? This is a picture in the infrared, and it's a reminder that everything emits radiation. This is a basic law of physics, and it underlies the greenhouse effect, which is an important reason why our planet is habitable at all. It would be a lot colder on our planet without greenhouse gases. So the fact of the matter is, greenhouse gases are increasing. This is a very canonical graph. I know it's après-ski, but we're just going to have a couple of greenhouse gas concentrations taken by direct measurements by humans from the top of Mauna Loa, which is a volcano in Hawaii. So it starts in 1958 there, and it goes up. This is the latest CO2 reading, April 6, 2018, pretty much right on the money, 409.25 parts per million. It's gone up almost 100 parts per million since this record began, which is huge. That's a big change to this gas that's very important for sort of warming our planet, and it's having a lot of impacts. I want to emphasize that this increase is us. We know that from multiple different ways. The first is just accounting. We know approximately how much CO2 we've emitted into the atmosphere from industrial activities, and it matches. It's not too bad. The second is atmospheric oxygen. Okay, so let's say you have a fire in front of you. What do you do to try to get it to go further? Give it oxygen. That's because when you burn things, you're affecting oxygen in the atmosphere. So while CO2 is going down, we're actually reducing the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Don't worry, it's not enough that you're going to notice it with breathing, but it's very consistent with burning of fossil fuels. It's us, right? The third is isotopes. So these are basically little tracers. The carbon dioxide in CO2 comes from plants that became coal and other fossil fuels many millions of years ago. And when we burn those, we can detect that by looking at the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know it's us. So I'll just say those things. Maybe you've heard some of them before, but this stuff is not the stuff that scientists are really talking about at all. It may be the things you hear about in the political sphere, but it's not the stuff we're talking about in the scientific sphere. So so we're increasing greenhouse gases. As I said, greenhouse gases emit radiation. When you have more radiation emitted, you warm, and it's warming everywhere. This is a long-term, so as Al said, climate is a long-term average. This is a long-term, last 100 plus years of map of the surface warming pattern over the whole globe. So the global mean has gone up. You hear that? That's why it's called global warming. But there's a lot of regionality to this pattern. And how much warming we get into the future will depend on a number of things. But there's one thing that's really important to know. In the long term, how this pattern looks depends on us. It depends on how much greenhouse gas we emit. So I'm not going to tell you much about skiing and snow because I don't really do that. That's not my specialty. I'm going to instead pass it on to my colleague and friend, Dr. Lipna.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so thank you for the nice segue. My name is Ben Lipna. I'm also a professor at the University of Colorado, and I'm a part of a group called the Western Water Assessment. And what we do in Western Water is we link science with users of science. So that can be like ski areas, that can be water managers, water users, people generally interested in science. And I'm going to talk a little bit just about the importance of snowpack on water resources. I'm also a civil engineer, and so we have a big challenge here in Colorado and in the West to store up water and use it when it is most needed. Yeah, so Western Colorado, where we are in today, as much as 75% of our water comes from snow, right? So understanding a little bit about how, where the snow is going to end up and how much snow we're going to have in a given year is very much helpful. I've got a picture at the bottom there of a reservoir, right? So we're very fortunate to have these nice reservoirs. Lake Dillon is such a reservoir, but there are larger ones, Lake Powell, Lake Mead. And that has really allowed humankind to live in places like the West that are generally quite arid. And so we really count on that. But actually, if you can advance just once, snow itself is a natural reservoir, right? And we kind of take that for granted, but it's much larger than any other man-made reservoir, and it would be incredibly expensive if we wanted to build a reservoir. If we lost all of our snow, it would be almost infeasible to build a reservoir that could capture all of that. So we really depend on the snow in a kind of an infrastructure role. Yeah, so what happens with our snow, and I think this is probably obvious to most of us, is the higher up you go, the more snow you tend to get, right? And this is really important for two reasons. One is if you're trying to predict the amount of water you're going to get in a given year. So April 1st is a day that water managers like to use to predict the amount of water we're going to get. So I'm showing a map here on the top. That's a river basin a little bit southwest of here, the Uncompahgre River, which flows near Ouray, Colorado. And those blue areas, kind of in that basin on that top plot, those are places where we've used satellites actually to measure really deep snowpacks. And on the bottom, I'm just basically showing that the vertical axis there is elevation, and the horizontal is snow water equivalent. And that as you go up in elevation, the amount of water you have in the snowpack tends to go up, and you tend to have more snow. And this is really important. So this term here, snow water equivalent, as an engineer, we're more concerned about that. So if you were to, say, melt down a bunch of snow, how much water would you have left over? Because in the spring, that's what happens, is you get water. The snow becomes water supply, and we can use it for, municipal and agricultural activities. So how do we do this? Okay, so this term, snow water equivalent, it lets us predict things, water supply. This is really important for planning and for managing, who gets to use what water. That can be politically contentious. I'm not going to talk about that today. So what you have here, I think that on the left there, you've got a map of the Yampa River, and there's a gauge near Mabel, Colorado. So those geometric shapes in that river basin, those are locations of observing stations, SNOWTEL observations. How many have heard of this network SNOWTEL? Okay, quite a few. And just a few hundred yards over here, we have a SNOWTEL site called Grizzly Peak. So this is a network of those. And what that can tell us, on the right, I've got this graph that varies through time. And that's the average snowpack in each year. So if you can't see in the back, it goes from about 1986 to 2012. So that's the amount of snow each year. It goes up some years, it goes down other years. You can advance one. So if you actually look at that graph, and then in the second graph, that black line is the total amount of stream flow we had in that same year. You can see that those two things are related to each other. They tend to rise and fall together. So knowing about the snowpack on a day like April 1st is really important. It lets us build these predictive models, pretty simple models. Snowpack, or the total water supply is going to be the snowpack multiplied by a number, or something like that. So it's really important. And if we continue, some of these stations are at lower elevations. I've got those red ones there. They're 8,000 to 9,000 feet. And continuing on, we've got higher, and once more we have even higher, if you don't mind going back, yes, stations. And what we're finding in our research is that as the climate warms, even in the last 30 years or so, those places, kind of like A-Basin, that are at the highest elevations, tend to be better predictors. They tend to tell us more about how much water we're going to have, and some of those lower lying stations tend to be worse, meaning if things continue to warm, we will have to kind of scramble a little bit to try to estimate our water supply, because the snowpack may go away. Yeah, so this is just some results from a similar research. On the left, I've got a plot of the entire upper Colorado River Basin. So it's a really big area that includes western Colorado, eastern Utah, southern Wyoming, and so on. The colors of those dots are these estimates based on computer modeling. If we model out 30 years from today, so the year 2050, and we say, well, do we expect to have more snowpack or less snowpack at these SNOWTEL stations? There's about 130 of them. And the red colors mean we expect to have less. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty in this. And actually, what's interesting is those blue colors, many of which are in this corridor of Colorado, are actually places where we expect to potentially have about the same or slightly more snow in April. That doesn't say anything about if spring is coming earlier, because by May we may not have the same snow. Things may melt off faster, but it is at least somewhat encouraging to see this part of the sort of continental divide as a unique ecosystem and a uniquely sort of almost, and I'm going to be very hesitant to use this word resilient, but I think there's a lot of reasons to feel somewhat optimistic about this particular corridor. And so I did not create this graphic, but this is kind of the same idea as what I just showed you for the entire west of North America. And the cooler colors, blue and yellow, tend to mean that we expect less change into the future. And I believe this is by the year 2085. So many of us will not be around to see this. Our children and our grandchildren will be around. The warmer colors suggest that, as much as 30, 40, 50% of the snowpack may be lost by then. You notice that Colorado there in the lower right does appear to be among the more resilient places. But this is really a serious issue, and it's a tough one for us. As human beings, we like to think about, what am I going to have for dinner tonight, or what am I going to go on vacation next year? But it's really hard for us to think about these long-term timescales, and it can be a challenge. So yes, to summarize, snowpack is definitely critical for our water resources here. As much as 3/4 of our water comes from snow, and potential declines in snow, as well as occurrence of droughts, which I didn't get a chance to talk about, may limit our ability to predict or to plan for the future. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Marka Hagenstead, and I wanted to thank Alan and Mike and Shaw and Dana for all your work here at A-Basin. I'm so impressed with everything you guys are doing. Thanks for having us, and for you all for being here. So I'm an economist, and I consult to public agencies in the private sector, and recently completed an exciting report for Protect Our Winters on the economic contributions of winter sports in a changing climate with Elizabeth Burakowski at University of New Hampshire and Rebecca Hill at CSU. First, we looked at overall participation in winter sports. About 23.5 million Americans participate in winter sports every year. Most popular, obviously, skiing and snowboarding, and then cross-country skiing, freestyle skiing, snowshoeing, snowmobiling, and telemark skiing. And over the last 10 years, skiing and snowboarding haven't changed too much in terms of participation. Snowmobiling actually is declining a little bit, and growing winter sports are cross-country, snowshoe, telemark skiing, and freestyle skiing. So we looked at expenditures from skiers and snowmobilers. We focused on them because of their large numbers of participation and available data. And we found downhill skiers and snowboarders are spending about $160 per day. And that includes your tickets at resorts, other expenditures on restaurants, gas, hotels, and also your clothing and equipment averaged out over the life of their use. And snowmobilers about $127. And so we put these expenditures into an economic model called InPlan, which was developed by the Forest Service, and found that these expenditures are contributing $11.3 billion to the U.S. economy and $2.6 billion to the Colorado economy. So it's a pretty big industry. These expenditures are contributing 191,000 jobs nationally and about 43,000 jobs in Colorado. And the ski industry in Colorado is the biggest in the nation. The next state is California, which is less than half of Colorado's. And so here you can see visitation over the last 15 years. There's a lot of variability here. And we looked at visitation data and compared it with the SNOTEL data and found a strong positive correlation between snow and skier visits. And you can see, go back one, the low was in 2012. Everybody across the country was really hit hard that year. That skier visits that year were about 50 million, and the high was in 2008, over 60 million. So that's a 10 million skier visit difference between, the lowest of the last 15 years and the highest. So big differences. So we looked at the 5 highest snow years over that period and saw that those years brought in 220,000 more skier visits. And the lowest 5 years over that period saw 470,000 less visits. So you can see that the low snow years had a bigger hit than the high snow years, a bigger impact. And in terms of dollars, those visits translated into an extra $42 million in the high snow years compared to the average.
Thank you, Marka. So my name is Lindsay Burgoyne, and I manage advocacy and policy for Protect Our Winters. We are really excited to work with Marka this year. So you've heard a little bit about the science, you've heard a little bit about the economics, and we wanted to make sure that we leave this on a positive note about the action that you can take on climate change and what you all here today can actually do to make a difference, because it is pretty scary when we look at the scientific models. And last year, that slide that we saw from Keith Musselman where it shows where there's going to be snow, that was a pretty downer moment, if I might say so myself, in terms of what things are going to look like in the future. So I'm going to add a little bit to what Marka said. We know that our winters are shorter, we know that our snowpack is diminishing, and we know that what should be falling as snow in a lot of places, not A-Basin today, is in fact falling as rain. It looks a little wet out there, but and we know if we don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions that these trends are only going to continue. So what does this look like on the ground? I think a lot of us are far too familiar, if we think back to that 2012 ski season, about this. This is Squaw Valley in Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe has suffered in the last 4 years a pretty severe drought. Obviously not so much as of late, but really struggling to keep the ski industry going. There were resorts that year that closed on Martin Luther King Day weekend, just shut up their doors. They couldn't afford to stay open. And all of you know how much that impacts our rural mountain communities and our mountain economies in terms of, nobody's in the restaurants, nobody's, renting gear. It's really devastating to those economies. At Protect Our Winters, we really focus on engaging and mobilizing the broader outdoor sports industry and making an impact on climate change and speaking up and being advocates. And when I think about why we do that, it's because we actually are a huge economic force. Unfortunately, we have people like Marka who take data from folks like Jen and Ben and can really translate that into a way that we can use that to speak to policymakers. And so it's unfortunate or fortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, but money talks. And when we go visit lawmakers in DC or in Denver at the Capitol, and we talk about what a big economic force the outdoor industry is, people start to listen. So this data on the left, I'm really excited to have a graph here today too, so is showing the economic force of the outdoor industry. And the Outdoor Industry Association, located right here in Colorado, did this research and released it in 2017, showing that the outdoor industry is an $887 billion economy. If we look at the two next to it, that's motor vehicles and pharmaceuticals. So if you add those two industries up, we're equal. We have a lot of economic weight when you think about the guides and the shops and the resorts, and the manufacturers and the products. It really adds up. And when we do talk to people, that's helpful. So a lot of people say, why us? Why do people who love recreating outside have to be advocates? And obviously that's your personal choice, whether you decide to be an advocate or not, but you have economics on your side. So what does Protect Our Winters do, and how can we actually do this? We take action on climate. That's what we're aiming to do. We do this by calling elected officials. We do this by submitting public comments on rule changes. We do this by attending local hearings. We do this by voting. Hopefully all of you do that. We show up in DC, and at POW we do that with athletes. We work with about over 100 athletes, professional athletes, to speak out on climate change. We work with resorts. We work with Al here at A-Basin on our Resort Alliance. We work with CEOs, brands like the North Face, Patagonia, Burton, Cliff Bar, and we ask them to speak up and to use their voice because, again, they have a lot of influence in this industry. And if Al shows up and is talking to somebody in DC, that's far more powerful of a story because it's about his business bottom line. So this is in September. We took a bunch of Olympians and athletes to DC, had a little fun. It was pretty exciting to meet with lawmakers there. We got to show them some videos of our athletes ahead of time. They were horrified by some of the big mountain spines they were riding and a little bit terrified, but the reality is some of those folks up there are Olympians, and when they pull out their medals, congressmen come out of the woodwork to talk to them. So we're okay with that. We're shameless. We're going to use that. So when it comes to acting on climate, that's a big thing, right? What climate policies specifically are we working on, or what can we actually do? And the reality is the world of climate policy is huge. There are a lot of things that we could be working on. And at Protect Our Winters, we're a pretty small staff, and we're a national organization, and so we've decided to be the most effective. We wanted to hone in on 4 specific issues that we feel like really relate with our community, and we did that by going out to folks like you and asking them what they care about, and talking to our businesses and talking to our resorts and saying, you know, what really resonates with you in terms of climate solutions. At POW, we talk a lot about how we are pro climate solutions. We are not against things. We are trying to be positive for solutions that, you know, really make sense in terms of the market. So clean energy is a great example of that. You know, obviously wind and solar are increasing. I'll tell one really wonky anecdote, but some of you may know that here in Colorado, Xcel Energy, one of our biggest producers here, has made a proposal in front of the Public Utilities Commission to get 55% of their power to renewable. That's pretty unprecedented, pretty unheard of, and POW is actually intervening in that process. Marco was one of our witnesses, talking about how important that is. And basically what happened was Xcel had to send out a bid to say, okay, we're going to build all these power plants, you know, powered by solar and powered by wind. And a report came back from these companies that bid, and the numbers showed that it's actually cheaper to create new power plants that are powered on solar and wind, plus store that energy, than it is to run existing coal plants. So coal doesn't matter anymore the way that it used to, and it's not, you know, a Republican or a Democrat thing. That's a market thing, and we have new evidence of that here in Colorado. So that's really exciting. Okay, thank you. Moving along. Sorry, that's a really exciting one. The other thing we work on at Protect Our Winters is setting an economy-wide price on carbon. We believe in putting a price on carbon. We think that's one of the greatest ways to reduce emissions and one of the quicker ways. If we want less of something, we make it more expensive. There are a lot of states in the nation that are fighting for this right now, and we're seeing a lot of progress. Unfortunately, in Oregon and Washington this year, it didn't quite make it to the finish line in their legislative seasons, but there was a lot of progress made and a lot of good talk and conversation in making sure that policy is developed. We also work on transportation solutions. If I had to guess, I won't make you raise your hand, but how many of you drive to trailheads and drive to ski areas? And we know that that's something our community does and depends on. So we want to fight to make sure that the vehicles that you have and the choices that you have when you are buying them are the most fuel efficient possible, that there are innovative electric vehicle infrastructure around, like there are charging stations on highways and remote places that we like to play. And then lastly, we just believe, not surprisingly, in protecting public lands from energy extraction. We think that we need balanced development on our public lands, and we shouldn't be really honing in and trying to pull a bunch of coal and oil and gas out of them. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to get involved, but I know that there's not the greatest cell phone service in here today, so you might not be able to take these actions, but if you can't, take a picture of it and do it later. But you can find us at protectourwinters.org. We're really here to help. And right now we have, you can sign up for our email list that's on the left. But this year in 2018, our focus is really going to be around midterm elections. We've gotten a little fed up. Our founder, Jeremy Jones, he's worked really hard over the last 10 years to help educate skiers and snowboarders about the impacts of climate change. And in the last few years, we've worked on policy to really try to push the needle on climate policy. But the reality is, unless we change the people in the seats, people aren't going to vote on climate change if they don't think it's real. So we're doubling down. You're gonna see us a lot of places this year in terms of the Colorado gubernatorial election, making sure that we elect a climate champion here in Colorado. And we really need you guys, and we need you to vote, and we need you to help us really educate your friends and your family and everybody you meet on the chairlift.
Has done more than POW to raise awareness about climate change, and they've done such a tremendous job. I know we have a POW logo embroidered on our uniforms to help spread the word, and what they've done has just been nothing short of incredible. Hey, I have a question for Jen and then for Ben. Maybe you guys can tag team this, but Jen, you showed us a slide of rising carbon in our atmosphere, and then Ben, you showed us a slide, a projection of what maybe 2085 might look like in terms of snowpack. So if we wanted to get to a different slide than one you showed that might look better for skiers and riders, and frankly for people that are in agriculture and water and city, everything, literally everything, what do we got to do first? What do the carbon levels need to change to, and what might we see different? I mean, I think Lindsay talked about advocacy, but advocacy for what? What's the end game? What's our goal there?
It's an excellent question and a very sobering one. So I showed that we've gone up 100 parts per million, and globally we've gone up, a degree Celsius. So that's already a lot. And if we go up another 100 parts per million, we'll make some simple approximations here. Let's just say we go up another degree. So 2 degrees, that's the Paris Agreement, basically. So we're halfway to what, governments of the world are really trying to get to, but we have things like the US pulling out of Paris, and we're nowhere close to getting to Paris. That's really encouraging to hear, because I think economics is what's going to drive it. There's lots of different ways to have change, but we need big changes in CO2. We need to stay at 400 parts per million. We need to go down from that maybe to really avoid the worst case scenarios. I also want to just I love doing this, a little bit of looking at graphs. So I love that most one graph. I think that's really dramatic. It said 2085 up here. You guys, just when you look at graphs like that, you should say, well, how do they know what's going to happen in 2085? Who has any idea? A better thing to write here would be, what is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere? That helps us think about what we need to do with energy, what we need to do with policy in order to get there. And my suspicion, based on the dramatic loss of snow, is that this is a very large increase in CO2 that we're looking at here. Probably it's up at, 700, 800, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a lot. It's probably double where we are today. But when you look at these kinds of graphs, look and see what the CO2 concentration is, because that's what you really need to be thinking about. I hope in 2085, we're at, maybe 350, something like that. I think that would be great. And it won't look like that. You'll have all your snow. That's my perspective.
Thanks, Jan. Well, so the question posed was, what can we do about the snowpack? And I think that really the answer would be through advocacy. And to get that, I think we have to really demonstrate what we're already seeing. You mentioned seeing earlier springs today, because the climate will respond to carbon and these other things. And I don't know if there's much that we can change once the climate is, once the snow falls or the rain falls. So I think we have to start thinking carefully about what's already changing. What can we already see? How can we use this to sort of demonstrate the importance? But it is ultimately an economic issue. I think that the veracity, the truth, is climate change real or not, I don't think that in and of itself isn't going to convince people. It's going to be, it has to be jobs, and it has to be, financial.
Okay, well, Marka, do you have any other, you gave us some great information, but do you want to dive a little deeper into any economic stuff to get us thinking about jobs as Ben talked about?
Sure, we've touched on this a few times today, just that it's unfortunate, but a lot of decisions, especially at the state level, are based on cost-benefit analysis, and that's just the way our society is. So a lot of people don't like that I slap dollar values on things, but I'm usually putting dollar values on things that are usually traditionally valued at 0. So I'm saying, hey, listen, this makes economic sense as well. And that's when change really happens. What else was I going to say? I can't remember. He just asked about ecosystem services. I do a lot of ecosystem valuation, and so the report for Protect Our Winters, the recent one, just looked at recreation, but when we look at impacts on water and then the wildfires that we're seeing, all of the economic impacts of that, when you put it on top of this, it's just tremendous.
Excellent, thanks you guys. So we've got about 20 minutes left, and I thought now we could open it up for questions, and I see one hand in back already.
Thanks for your presentations. The CO2 concentration levels were a global number, right? And the U.S. is about 5% of the world's population, right? So what is our contribution in the U.S. to the global problem both directly and indirectly, because I know we purchase a lot of products that contribute to this problem from our trading partners.
Yeah, so the indirect and direct, I'm not sure I can give you, but in terms of the rise that you've seen in that graph, we're the #1 contributor in the world. Right now, in terms of annual emissions, it's between us and China, and I think China just beat us out. A reminder that there are a lot more people in China than there are in the United States. So on a per capita, we're much higher than them. Another important thing about CO2, which makes it really a global problem, is that it is mixed globally. And I didn't mention that when I showed the Mauna Loa curve, but that's something that's really important. It doesn't matter where you emit greenhouse gases. They all go up in the atmosphere, and they stay there for 100 years. So they affect you, they affect your kids, they affect your grandkids, right? And it also doesn't matter where you take it out. So if China, for example, decided, hey, CO2 is a really big problem, and they said, screw the US, they're not doing anything, they could invent a CO2 sucking machine and start pulling it out of the air, and we don't have any international treaties related to that at all. So there's a lot of interesting things that could come on the table if, for example, technology came to the place where we could start removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And it sounds fantastical, but believe me, people are working on it right now. Yeah.
So the follow-up question to that is, even though over the last 2 years it's been discouraging to see some erosion in our policy choices, but if you look globally, are we still the leader in terms of understanding and the technology to deal with this? Or are there other countries that are stepping ahead of us, either practically or theoretically going forward?
That's an excellent question. I would say the US is still a leader in science, in the science that I do. And in fact, nations like China are coming to us right now and asking for guidance because they see what an important problem this is. I still have a ton of international collaborators who want to come, actually not just to the US. You know where they want to come? Colorado. You know why? We have the National Center for Atmospheric Research here, and it's one of the world leaders in understanding climate and climate change. But that said, Elizabeth and I both know plenty of people at NCAR, and some who lost their jobs this last year. In fact, there was a 10% cut to jobs at NCAR. And so this is why it's so important that you go out and vote. It's not just about science and technology in this particular field, but it's about our competitive edge on the world, right? If we don't lead the world in these things, someone else is going to jump up and do it. And maybe that helps you sleep better at night because maybe China will take over, but I kind of want to be in charge. And so we should continue to invest in science and technology, and that's what's going to help drive the economics of clean energy and our ability to make good decisions in this context. That's my own personal opinion. So, yeah.
Question up here.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to creative solutions that Colorado has come up with specifically with the skiing industry as far as reducing carbon emissions.
Sure, I'm going to throw that back to Al and let him tout some of the incredible work that A-Basin is doing.
We are attacking this on many fronts. Visibly, we have a couple of solar plants here. Our building at the summit, Snow Plume Refuge Ski Patrol headquarters. Now that we did a solar facility installation on that year before last, and we think that is about neutral. We're generating about as much electricity as the building uses, so that's a very good thing. We got something like that on our kids center. We are seeking out sources through Excel to buy renewable energy. Related to the same thing Lindsay was talking about, there's a big plant coming online in eastern Colorado that we hope to be a part of, that we could get up to 20% of our electricity from renewable resources. We are in the midst, and this is, I can't say this is all altruistic, there's with the Clean Air Act, all the engines in our snowcats need to be improved to a much cleaner engine, and we've begun switching out those cats, which is not cheap. It's about $350,000 a vehicle. We buy one each year. But our snowcats are biggest consumer of diesel, and so now the greenhouse gases, they're going to use as much diesel, but they're going to burn and reburn in a much, much cleaner way. We put a ton of energy into our waste stream, and I think we're at 40-something% of our waste stream now does not go to the landfill. It's either composted or recycled. We've done a number of things to the buildings to try to fix them and clean them up. This old A-frame is not a great example of that, but we've done some good things to the building anyway, putting in airlocks and all kinds of things. And I think we do, Mike and Shaw prepare this annual report, sustainability report. The next one is coming out very soon. The rough draft is in my inbox on my computer, and we're in our 4th year in a row where our electricity consumption has gone down. 4th year in a row that our propane consumption has gone down, which I think is especially noteworthy because over the 4 years our business levels, everything we're doing, number of people here, number of employees, number of burgers made, number of beers served, everything else has gone up, and so our actually consumption per skier has gone way down. Our overall consumption has gone down, and we've got plans to keep working on that and plans to keep converting to more renewable sources.
I would just add 2 quick things to that. One is that I would say in Colorado, because there's such a great amount of ski resorts, there's a lot of ski resorts that are stepping up and starting to talk about this. We saw Vail's big announcement last year about switching to clean energy. We saw Aspen Skiing Company actually intervene in that PUC process. Like, how many ski resorts want to get down and dirty with their Public Utilities Commission? That's pretty rare nationwide. So I think that's something to celebrate, the leadership of all the resorts in this state. And then at the state level in Denver, I would say that Colorado hasn't unfortunately been at the forefront of some of climate policy in the nation. Last week we actually were really excited to celebrate. We passed a bill in the House to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, which was a pretty big victory in the House, and we had a lot of great advocacy around that. The really sad reality of that is that that's where it ends, because our Senate is dominated by people that don't think climate change is real, and so until that changes, we're not going to be able to pass progressive policy. So again, I'm plugging voting.
Question in the back there.
This might be for Ben or Jen maybe. To what extent does the American West depend on Colorado snowpack for water, agriculture, etc.? Could you speak to sort of the vastness of the implications?
Yeah, well, so starting with the Colorado River Basin as a unit, that provides water to some 40 million people in 2 countries, and I believe it's something like 9 states, and so 8 states. So the majority of Colorado River water originates in Colorado. Okay, so we are a net sort of exporter of water to the rest of the basin, and so we are essentially at the most critical point in that whole system. California gets a lot of water from Colorado River Basin, Arizona, and a lot of that water goes to irrigation. I'd say the majority without a doubt, the majority goes to irrigation. And so also once you get above 10,000 feet or even 9,000 feet, even within Colorado, that's where the majority of the water falls as snow. So we're really, where we sit today is actually one of the most important places, almost in the West, certainly within the Southwest.
Question?
Yeah, question. So now that the outdoor industry is part of the GDP, I think that's been a couple of years now, maybe a year or 2. Are you seeing any positive trend in the data towards globalization at all in the last few years?
Towards what?
Towards policy changing, seeing a positive trend that'll eventually affect the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about two years ago, Congress actually unanimously passed a bill, believe it or not, in D.C. in both the Senate and the House to count the outdoor recreation economy as part of the U.S. GDP. It hadn't actually been counted before, so we're pretty excited about that and to see some of the numbers that come out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economics. But I think we're really at the beginning of seeing the outdoor industry really wield its political power and understand its influence. When we take a step away from climate and we really think about the public lands fight, like I'm sure there's not somebody in this room that didn't hear about Bears Ears and that didn't hear about the outdoor industry speaking up for the places that we play and protecting them. And what we like to talk about at Protect Our Winters, even though it's pretty depressing, is the reason that our lands are up for grabs is because people want to develop them for energy, which is a climate problem. So it's really one circular problem, but I think we're really seeing the outdoor industry have its voice. Like, they were not happy with the way Utah was handling public lands, so they said, we're going to yank our trade show and move it to Denver, Colorado, because Colorado understands what public lands policy should look like. So I think we're really at the beginning of that economic power.
Question up here.
I was just wondering if you thought a net zero ski area was ever a possibility, or how far out it is. Is it 20 years or 50 or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know how far out it is. I know we're working on redoing our sustainability strategic plan, and we're trying to figure out how to target that realistically. I think as public energy sources, I mean, that's our greatest opportunity, is to get them to move to renewables. And we can do some stuff here, but we can't do it all here. But the more we can get this connected to the bigger picture, I think that's our greatest shot.
What about like electric snowcats or electric lifts? Is that a possibility, or is that just?
Well, the lifts are electric.
Lifts are electric. Backup's just diesel.
You know, I'm not a mechanical engineer on the snowcat piece. They're kind of monstrous beasts.
Like it,
yeah. You know, snowmaking has come a long, long way. You know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, snowmaking was just a horrible user of electricity. It still uses a lot of electricity, but the equipment, the machines people are using now have made some tremendous strides of late over the last several years. So I think it can happen. I don't know. You know, I take that back. You know, Aspen is engaged. I can't talk to this specific stuff, but they invented in a methane plant nearby that's generating electricity. They've done it. They had a great opportunity, and the people willing to do it there. But there are opportunities. Yeah.
I would just add that in Squaw Valley and Lake Tahoe, their power provider is a really small utility, not big, unfortunately, like we have here in Colorado. And so the CEO of Squaw Valley was actually able to challenge the CEO of the utility to go renewable so that the resort that their power uses is. And that's a great example of, you know, getting down and dirty with the PUC.
Yes.
I've come on holiday from Scotland, and the ski area that I enjoy most, they have a wind turbine that makes electricity for all of the lifts. And that wind turbine is really strong, because the places we tend to enjoy going are invariably very windy places. And I wonder if it's something you might consider here at A-Basin.
You know, we have looked at that pretty closely, and you know, I think you might see some smaller wind turbines here before too long. Frankly, the wind people have told us this really is not the best place for turbines, and and that's why I brought up the Eastern Colorado piece. I was specifically talking about solar, but I don't know that. Again, I'm not an engineer, but I'm told the mountains, the highly variable winds, the lack of flat land. You know, we looked at just the safe zone around a turbine that's required. We don't have room for it anywhere here. So it's a great idea. It might not be here.
There's a lot of places up around Sterling and northwestern Colorado, with Iowa, places like that, where the land is conducive to having winds all the time. But if you partner with people like that, you essentially get more wind power in one part of the state, you'll be better off.
Yeah, great point. Any other questions? Oh God, they're everywhere. Right there.
So continuing the renewable energy questions, that's awesome that wind and solar are now cheaper than coal. I assume that they're still not cheaper than natural gas. Studies I've read suggest that nuclear still are. What is POW's stance on nuclear energy? If you don't support it, why not?
We actually don't have a position on that. And so, yeah, happy to answer that and talk about it offline. The way that we talk about it is that we think wind and solar are more effective right now, and that with our limited capacity, that's what we're going to choose to advocate for. And so we don't, like, we could work on now I'm blanking. There are a multitude of climate policies, right, that we could work on and engage in, and nuclear is certainly one of them. So we try to really hone in our policy agenda and pick on things that we feel like are most impactful and mostly widely accepted by kind of the outdoor industry and the broader community. But definitely happy to talk about that.
So we got just a couple minutes left, but let's go with you.
Transportation. Most of us probably drove with a couple of people in a car here. Is there anything on the table about public transportation ski areas? Probably John, take that.
No, well, you're exposed. I maybe have a few comments, but why don't you run with it?
I mean, I would say here in Colorado, there's not. I mean,
question?
yeah. Okay. So the question was about public transit to ski areas, and I actually might turn that over to Mike or Shaw to not know more about specifically proposals here in Summit County. You know, in terms of coming up from the Front Range, there are certainly some options now, but it's pretty limited. We were pretty excited to see the ski train run again to Winter Park. That was pretty unique and innovative. But I think on the policy front, one thing that's really exciting, we'll see if this continues under a new administration, but Governor Hickenlooper supported a policy basically proposal with Utah and Nevada's governors to basically make their highways together all supportive of electric vehicles, and that would include putting a charger every 30 miles. And the way that their plan is to fund that is to actually take the money that, if you remember the whole VW lawsuit, and reinvest that money that VW had to pay to states as a penalty in investing in electric vehicles and electric buses. And I should say, Protect Our Winters partners with a company called Proterra, and they actually just launched a fleet in Park City with a new drivetrain that is an electric bus that is now doing public transit in Utah. A little bit different because it's so close to the population center.
You know, I might add a couple things. In Summit County, Eagle County, over in Pitkin County and Aspen, all of those communities really have very robust public transportation systems, considering the size of their community and what they do. You know, we really do push and encourage people to take the bus. Just about every resort community has parking challenges also. And I think one thing we need to really change the paradigm about the way people think is, you know, you just can't show up at 11 o'clock Saturday morning and expect you're going to get a parking spot in any of these resorts anymore. You just can't do it. It's an old school way of thinking. The answer is not just to keep bulldozing down forests and building more parking lots. We need to get more people to carpool, to ride the bus. You know, unfortunately, there have been a couple attempts at commercial service to the mountains, to the ski areas, ski carpool, notably a couple of years ago. They just haven't played out yet. But we need to all do more ourselves. You know, for example, our employees on Saturdays and Sundays have to either carpool or ride the bus. And the thinking of, you know, when I have to park one of those guys in a six-pack truck driving by himself, just drives me batty. You know, so I think we have a big cultural shift. I don't think our state is ready yet to do the train. I'd love to see it someday before I'm gone. But I think gas is going to have to get a lot more expensive, and I think the highway traffic's going to have to get a lot worse before we see that. Yeah. Believe it or not, I think it's going to have to get a lot worse. Maybe one last question. Oh, that was a powerful raising of the hand and back.
We live in a force field, which now seems to have, as I think about it, two parts. One given to us, and I'm not a geologist, so I'm going to say geologically, but the other, I think is generated by what we say. And so thank you for what everyone has said today, because I think it's the product of these two that are changing the climate. Okay, now to frame the question I want to ask, I'm looking at that word car on the screen, which is making me think of cars and trucks. So I'm going to compare, to frame the question, the Earth system to a car or truck, which we know in order to be okay, for the engine to be okay, it regulates its temperature. Okay, so the question I want to ask, kind of in that picture. I have heard scientists talk about a tipping point with regard to how the Earth engine regulates its temperature. Could you comment on where we are with regard to that tipping point?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to pick up on a couple of things here. So there's tipping points in the physical system, and there's also tipping points in the human system. And I would say right now we are seeing the impacts of climate change. We know it's real. It's not just dependent on some scientists telling us that it's happening. We are seeing it. So we are at a tipping point right there. I think that we need to do something about it now, or we're going to lose things and they're not going to be able to come back. There's a lot of examples of that. You can talk about ecosystems. You can talk about physical things in the systems like glaciers that melt and we can't make those come back quickly and they rise sea level. Not everything is a tipping point though, and I think we need to be careful when we use that word and carefully define it. I think we should be thinking about those though, like the irreversibility. Where are we doing things that we're not going to be able to come back from? And we're there. We're doing it right now. So in that sense, we've already hit a tipping point.
Do you guys on the panel, anyone have any other closing comments?
Well, I just want to say I'm very encouraged to see all these faces here today. It's demonstrates that people care. A-Basin cares. It's really an honor to be a part of this, and I hope to do my part to help out.
All right. Well, I would like to thank all of you guys for joining us today. A special thanks to Jen, Ben, Marka, and Lindsay for joining us today. Thank you guys so much, and also to Sean, Mike, and Elizabeth here in the front. Thank you guys.